So I was having a conversation with my husband the other day, and I was really struck by something that came out of my mouth. And that was the words, "At least I don't hate myself anymore." And I wanted to talk about that today because it's true, I don't hate myself, but I did for a really long time. And I want to talk a little bit about why I said those words in that conversation with my husband and share some stuff around that I think could be really helpful for other sensitive souls out there who might be navigating what it means to accept themselves and to navigate the tricky stuff that comes our way. So, welcome to the podcast. This is SelfKind, a podcast for highly sensitive people, and I am your host, Erica Webb. I am a highly sensitive person, but I am also a registered counselor, a somatic exercise coach, and a yoga teacher. And I'm so glad you're here. Welcome. If this is your first time joining me, welcome. If you've been around for a while, welcome. So happy to have you here. And like I said, I want to share a little bit of a personal story today around this conversation that I had with my husband. But first, I want to point out that I'm recording this episode after missing a couple of weeks on the podcast. And that actually has a lot to do with the story. So it's been a couple of weeks. And for the last 2.5 weeks, every single day I've had a child home sick. And, winter, it's been a lot. And so my schedule has been thrown completely off course. And all the things that I was like, I will get this done before the school holidays hit, that is probably not going to happen because, when you've got kids homesick, things change. And that was kind of part of the goings on that led to this conversation with my husband. So the last couple of weeks, things have been really busy, but had kids at home. Things have been out of my control in a lot of ways, right? My schedule changing, things happening unexpectedly. And as a sensitive person, I don't really like that. I like to know what's coming. I like predictability. I like routine. I do like lots of space and freedom to make choices depending on how I feel. But at the same time, I like to be in control of them, right? I don't really like them being thrown at me. And so there's been a lot of that happening recently. And if you've been around listening to this podcast for any length of time, you might have also heard me talk before about how this last year in particular, has been a really hard year in my personal life. So a little over 12 months ago, I learned that I'm a donor-conceived person and the father who raised me is not my biological father. Now, that has come with so much baggage and so many issues and so much grief and loss and trauma. My mother passed away not too long ago as well. And so there is just a lot, right? Like when I list out all the things that have happened in the last 12 months or so, objectively, I look at it and I think, gosh, if I walked into my own counseling room as a client, I'd be like, oh, sweetheart, you have been through a lot. And whilst I know that, I do also tend to sort of continue to put high expectations on what I should be capable of doing. And that's really what led me to that conversation with my husband and me recording this episode. Because a couple of weeks ago, might be a week ago maybe, I kind of fell in a bit of a heap. And I was so exhausted. I ended up spending the afternoon on the couch and I was so tired. And I had this thought of what did I miss? What signal did I miss? What opportunity did I miss to look after myself, to engage in self-care, to tend to my needs? Why did I end up flat out on the couch? And there was this moment where I risked getting into a little bit of self-blame and self-criticism and shoulds and you can do better than this. And I paused and thought, it's interesting how we can kind of treat self-care and managing our emotions and figuring out how to regulate our nervous system. If we have perfectionist tendencies, which, I'll put my hand up for, we have a tendency sometimes to try to perfect that as well. And so then when things aren't going perfectly, when things aren't going sort of swimmingly and we find ourselves overwhelmed or angry or frustrated or exhausted, we might think, what am I doing wrong, right? And the thing is, you may well be doing nothing, quote unquote, wrong. You are just living a human life, and a human life is going to include moments where you are overwhelmed, moments where you are exhausted, moments where you are sad, angry, in grief, all of the above. And so we have to get to a point where we recognize that to feel those ways is not to have failed. It's not failing, it's human. And you will, even with all the tools in the world, still experience those things. You will. And that doesn't mean you're failing. That doesn't mean you're getting it wrong. It is unkind and it is unrealistic to think that you can move through life and avoid those things if you just get self-care, looking after yourself, self-regulation, like just right. Stop putting that kind of pressure on yourself. So if I come back to this conversation that I was having with my husband, it was the same kind of conversation, right? I was saying like, gosh, I ended up on the couch today, which is fine. Like I don't actually have any issue with ending up on the couch, but I had a lot to do and I was feeling really overwhelmed. And I said, it frustrates me sometimes that that is the case, right? That I still experience this. And there's this other part of me that's like laughing, kind of like, are you serious? Like, look at what you've sort of been trying to navigate over the last little while. It's a lot by anybody's standards. So like, give yourself a break. You need rest, you need these things. But the thing that was really interesting was that comment that came out of my mouth of like, yeah, but at least I don't hate myself anymore. Because not too many years ago, I did. I really, really did. I found it very hard to sort of tolerate myself. And that's hard when you literally live inside of yourself. There is no kind of reprieve from that. And I found that I was so hard on myself back then, that those moments of overwhelm and overstimulation and grief and frustration, I looked at every single one of those moments as evidence that I wasn't a good person, that I was failing, that I wasn't measuring up, that I was a bad mother, a bad business owner, a bad wife, a bad everything. And I couldn't hold it because it was like, that is too much evidence that you're not a good person, too much evidence that you're messing everything up. And it makes me sad to think about that because it was not a fair, that wasn't fair. At no point was that ever a fair way for me to see myself, but I did. And so for me, that reflection of like, at least I'm not there anymore, really brought me around to once more thinking about how grateful I am that I learned how to meet myself with compassion. If this is your first episode listening to this podcast, then you might not have heard me talk about self-compassion before, but if you've listened to any other episodes, you'll know this is one of my favorite topics. And as I'm recording this, we're about to enter the final week of the current round of Soma Home, which is my 8-week online group program for highly sensitive people to help with this overwhelm that we can feel, with the overstimulation, with the way that we can tend to neglect our needs in service of other people's needs. And last week, week 7, was all about self-compassion. And whilst I won't share any of the specific stories from the members of that program, because that is, a very private little space where people can be free to say whatever they need to say and explore whatever it is that they need to explore, what I will say is that some of the feedback was like, this is simpler than I thought. Being able to offer myself compassion is maybe a little simpler than I realized. But simple doesn't mean easy, right? And so in that program and in other places, I really focus on making self-compassion very doable. Like, because often you'll hear people talk about self-compassion. It's like, yeah, but like, it's a great idea, but what is it? Like, how do you do it? It sounds like just this thing, like, give me instructions, give me the step-by-step, give me the how-to. And that was what we were doing in Soma Home. And there's just really nothing, like I in some ways I don't even know how to talk about how transformative it can be, because it's just like it is so transformative to be able to meet yourself in a way that says, hey, you're not broken, despite all the evidence that you think that you have, that you are not okay, that you are not good enough. You're okay. You're fine. This is what it is to be human. And when we are in those moments of overwhelm and overstimulation and feeling like we haven't done enough, we're not doing enough, we're not being exactly who we want to be, those are the moments. Those are the moments when we need to be able to offer ourselves compassion, and we need to be able to do it in a really simple way because we're vulnerable in those moments. And when we're vulnerable, we need simple steps. And so I wanted to share that with you today, primarily as an example of the fact that even with all the tools, humans are going to just keep being human. We're going to keep feeling certain ways. We're going to have these human experiences that are sometimes tricky to navigate and can sometimes quickly point us towards self-criticism. But you don't have to go down that path every single time. You can choose to meet yourself compassionately. You can choose to get on your own side. And I want to give you some simple ways to do that. But I also want to point out that this is what I do in some of my programs. So the next round of Soma Home is going to be running towards the end of August, mid to late August. There's a wait list open for that at the moment. And in that program, we really talk a lot about how to do this in a really tangible way. I've also created a self-paced mini course inside the SelfKind Hub. And the SelfKind Hub is my online membership program where it's like a DIY, right? So you go in, you take movement classes, you can take these little mini courses and watch master classes. And it's all around how do I treat my body and my mind and my sensitivity with kindness. So you'll find yoga classes, somatic exercise, master classes, and then this self-compassion mini course, a values mini course, a few other bits and pieces. And so if self-compassion is something that you want to dive further into, I just want to flag that there's a couple of ways to do that with my content, and I'll pop some links into the show notes so that you can check those out if you would like to. But what I really want to point out with this episode is how powerful it can be to just simply state what's happening for you. So in that moment that I had a couple of weeks ago, a week or two ago, where I was just so exhausted and I was really feeling quite frustrated that I couldn't do more than I was doing, we have to name it. We have to be able to say like, oh, it's painful to me that I can't get to everything I want to do, because on some level that makes me feel like I'm not doing enough. And the thought that I'm not doing enough is really painful. And it's that statement of, here's what I feel. Here's what I'm feeling. Not to sugarcoat it, not to give it lots and lots of reasons around it, but just to say, this is how I feel. Sensitive people, from my experience, tend to be very good at adding more to that statement, like, this is how I feel, but it's okay, don't worry. Or this is how I feel, but I'm really justified. Or this is how I feel, and, blah, 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 blah. And that can be helpful. And certainly we want to get curious about where those thoughts and beliefs and things are coming from. But what can sometimes happen when we do that is that we start to try to talk ourselves out of it. And what I think can be like more powerful than trying to talk yourself out of your feeling is to acknowledge it first. So it's a little bit like when you have a child and they want something from you, your attention, a snack, glass of water, whatever it might be. They persist, trying to get your attention. And our emotional state is really not that much different to that. If we ignore it, if we push it away, if we try to transmute it into something else, it's like, no, hang on, I'm here and I want to be felt. If you had a child who was like, I'm hungry, and you were like, no, you're not hungry, it's fine. You had food an hour ago and you'll have food again in an hour, and your kid's like, yeah, but I'm hungry now. There's not much you can say to convince that child that what they're feeling is incorrect, right? Or that they want to continue to be heard in that request. And I sometimes think it's really helpful to think of the way that your emotions and your feelings and your body kind of tries to communicate with you in the same way. Hey, I'm having a feeling. Please don't minimize it. Please don't pretend it's not true. Please don't try to push it away. Does it change when we acknowledge it, when we meet it with compassion, when we have, all those tools at our disposal? Yes. But, or maybe, not always, but yes, it can. But we have to be honest with ourselves first. This is painful. This is a moment of discomfort. I don't like this. And I'm going to choose to be kind to myself anyway, because to be in this feeling state is so human. To feel like I'm not getting it all right is so human. To feel overwhelmed is so human. And so I can't punish myself for that, because I can't not be human, right? It comes part and parcel with the whole human experience. So I wanted to share that, because that is really the practice that has allowed me to go from being someone who was regularly overstimulated and overwhelmed and really didn't like myself as a result, to someone who does still sometimes feel overwhelmed and overstimulated. But I don't hate myself anymore. I really, really like who I am. I really love myself. And that felt like a million light years away for a long time. So I really just want to remind you that just because you get overstimulated, overwhelmed, have feelings of anxiety or frustration or grief or sadness or anger or any of the human emotions that we might sometimes label as negative or bad or not as desirable, that's okay. That's okay. That is the opportunity to use your tools, not to beat up on yourself. Get on your own side. And that starts with self-compassion. All right, let me know if you've got questions. I am so keen to support you with specific questions if you've got them. So please, send me an email, erica@ericawebb.com.au. Come find me on Instagram, Erica at @EricaWebb_selfkind. Been a while since I've said that out loud. I would love to be able to answer your questions. If you want to work more closely with me, I'll pop those links in the show notes. You can also work with me one-on-one. I've got a few counseling spots available at the moment. But I also really want this to be tangible and available and accessible, whether you have any intention of ever working with me more deeply or not. That's the goal of this podcast and the YouTube channel, is to give you tools so that you can do this. I really hope that knowing that it's possible gives you some hope. So to my fellow highly sensitive and neurodivergent folks out there who can be kind of hard on themselves, feel like they're never really quite measuring up, I see you. You're doing great. Be kind to yourself. It makes a whole lot of difference.